My first job in housing was for the Ministry of Housing in Kenya. I took a local job, and that was the year 1974. So I have been in the field, never stopped working in the housing field. A lot has changed, and has changed positively, simply because many countries have much more stable macroeconomies. We went through a very difficult spot in the 70s, and many countries had macroeconomic problems. So housing finance systems basically couldn't work in environments with high inflation. Setting up housing finance systems was impossible. So many countries during those years started to develop special funds, housing banks sponsored by governments. But all these systems had limitations, because when you have a special fund, it has to come from the central bank or from other sources. They cannot expand very much, particularly if then the loans that these funds make are subsidized. You can then not offload, we call that in technical terms, these loans or refinance these loans, because they have subsidized interest rates, and so for investors these loans are not very interesting. That began to be a real bottleneck in many countries that had enormous urbanization, many people coming to urban areas, and a growing need for housing finance. What we have seen in recent years is that many of these special funds, government housing banks, have been reorganized and have been run on a commercial footing, so that you can actually use the pool of mortgages that these institutions make to get capital into your bank. To say it very simply. In many countries, major shifts in both the subsidy system and the way the mortgage portfolios can therefore be funded. So I have seen in the finance side enormous progress. On the real side, of course, we have seen progress, but it is interesting to see that in many countries we are going also on the real side, how you construct housing for the poor particularly, back to original concepts that were not much accepted by governments in the 70s. There is something to say to utilize not just developer-built housing for the lower middle class and so on, but to go back to self-construction projects like we had in the 70s. So yes, we have made enormous progress. We can have much more private sector involvement in the housing sector, because we have a growing financial sector in many countries. But for those where the financial sector and the developer private sector do not work yet, we are going back to certain concepts that I started out my career with.